Hello and welcome. I'm Andrew Petersen, the CEO of the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia. And welcome to this special conversation from BCSD Australia. I'm joining you today from the lands of the Camaragal people, and I acknowledge their continuing connection to country and pay my respects to elders past and present. Today, I'm joined by Professor Belinda Wade, who is the Chair in Climate Action and Ethical Transitions in the Business School at the University of Queensland. The University of Queensland Business School is a BCSDA member. Now, if you're running or advising a business in Queensland at the moment, the question behind this conversation we're going to have is pretty simple. What's changing around climate and energy? What does it mean for Queensland business and investment? And really, what should business leaders be doing about it? Now, Belinda, a big thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thanks, Andrew. It's great to be here with you today.
Before we get into the issues at the heart of Sustain Queensland, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute, what are you working on through the business school that actually matters at the moment, that you think, to a business audience, particularly those decisions that business leaders are making at the moment, which is quite a lot on the issue of climate change?
Yeah, it's always an important issue for businesses. Look, I'm really fortunate at the moment to have recently taken up a new role, or a slightly new role for me, and that's a chair in climate action, ethical transitions, which is an amazing privilege because it allows me to really focus in on what I think is important, on the topic we're discussing today. So there's kind of three key areas we're running within the chair. Now, the first one, which I think comes to the heart of what we do within a university, is teaching. So how do we increase the knowledge of our students in terms of their climate and ethics knowledge, given that they are then going out into organisations and they're really the future of the Queensland businesses. So shaping that knowledge. So that's one of the key areas we're working on. Another one is around the area of business and business transitions. So how can we understand those bottlenecks and challenges businesses are facing to support towards an increased rate of decarbonisation and action on sustainability and climate issues? So we've got a few pieces of work under that. We've got the work we're doing with the Australian Accounting Standards Board, looking at organisational behaviour change. We've got work that is about to commence on financing the energy transition. So how do you mobilise finance at the time it's really required? But we've got, I guess, to be honest, a lot of different pieces of work, in that scope, as you'd imagine, from within the business school. And the third arm, which I think is just so important, I know we'll touch on today, is around communities. So how do we enable communities to be part of that transition so they're not having something forced on them, but they're actually key decision makers? They can self-determine where their community is going and how they play a role, within that. And so one of the big projects we've got underway through that comes under the Net Zero Australia banner, and it's looking at trust in the energy transition. So that trust between organisations and communities, which we sort of say is vertical trust, or organisations and government, or that horizontal trust. So how does the relationships within communities, between communities, or between different levels of organisation, how does that shape the way decisions are made and the way the energy transition is really experienced?
Okay.
So lots happening,
Lots.
Andrew.
and lots of different things happening. It's not one linear conversation. It's a lot of different moving parts in a world where I think a lot of people will appreciate how interwoven the energy conversation is into absolutely everything we do, whether that's as you say, a trust question, it's an ethics question, it's a regions question. There's so many different aspects and parameters around changing something like that has been, in one sense, the status quo for such a long time. Which actually brings us very neatly to Sustain Queensland, ladies and jelly beans. And so, following the success of Sustain Queensland 2025, which was sold out, well
Mm.
done, everybody. This year, we're asking some pretty practical questions this time about Queensland's economic future, how industries are changing, what does it mean, as you said, for regional Queensland, where those opportunities are, and how businesses maintain community trust. That's the golden aspiration of social license to operate. So let's start with the big picture first. And that is that there's been a lot of noise lately about whether climate action is actually slowing down, either at a corporate or even a government or governmental level. What do you think is actually happening? Is this a temporary pause, a bigger change in direction, or something else?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no skirting around the fact that it's a difficult time in business at the moment, and we are seeing changes, in engagement with the issue of climate change and sustainability. And I think there's probably quite a few reasons for that. So obviously you'd have to have your head in the sand to realize that there isn't a change in the way the discussion is happening, both at a global
Mm,
level and a national level. So that, of course, influences the way organizations respond to this issue. And now some of it I think is probably public facing. Maybe they're not talking about it as much. Um, but some of it, that we're still seeing, action internally within organizations. But I also feel like that we've hit this sort of point where, we had that real boom of net zero commitments, on the back of COVID.
mm,
And we saw this real influx. And, it was really, the issue was really riding high for quite a while. Now we've hit so I would say, a more difficult economic environment in which businesses are operating in at the same time as we've hit this period of mandatory reporting. So I feel like part of what we're seeing is almost like a rationale of what was done then. So,
mm,
that like some organizations would have done that real solid understanding of what it means for the targets that they've set, and mapped out exactly what needs to happen to get to that net zero. But, in some ways, the discussion was, it was kind of quite early on. So now we're hitting this period with the mandatory reporting where companies are really having to understand what those targets mean. And in some cases, I think we are seeing a bit of an adjustment in terms of financially and practically what can they do at what rate.
mm,
Um,
mm,
so I sort of feel like there's almost two stories. There's sort of a rationale adjustment, I mean, sorry, a rationality adjustment in terms of what can be done. But there is definitely that other story of, the economy is, obviously not quite as strong as it was, and there's all these other pressures coming in, and cost of living and the prices and inflation, etc. And I think all that does influence what the decisions businesses are making.
mm. Okay. That's going to be interesting to sort of gauge at Sustain Queensland when we do the Mentimeter again in the audience. So let's turn to the question of a competitive Queensland and particularly its economy. If we were to look at climate and energy and trade and what communities are particularly expecting within Queensland, across Queensland, what do you think does a competitive Queensland economy look like from here?
Yeah, I should, and I should probably have reflected this on my last question, that the fundamental reason for being more sustainable and acting on climate change has not changed. In fact, probably
Mm,
the physical parameters of or drivers have really got worse over time. So I
mm,
should say that I think will always prevail, because that underlying rationale is stronger than ever as to why we need to change. So what it means to the state of Queensland, when you look at our economy, we really do need to think about, well, where are those advantages going forward versus the advantages we've held in the past? And obviously, we are, our economy is very resource based, and there will need to be a change in the way that, these sectors are operating, but that doesn't mean they aren't without advantage. there is a huge amount of advantage and a huge amount of Queensland's resources which will be needed to underpin the clean energy transition.
Mm.
Um, so I think, thinking about those transition minerals and where they come from and, what we can develop as a state there, but
Yep.
then all those, other aspects around, the way our industries operate, how we can support our industries to be aligned with the climate transition. Can we support them to be, clean, both domestic and export industries, given where things like CBAM are going? Can we make sure that they are these decarbonised industries that will be, at a premium demand going
Mm.
forward? And this isn't going to be an easy change. I mean, as you mentioned, Andrew, the energy transition really underpins the transition of just about all other sectors. So getting
Yeah,
that
really
right
good
and
point. Yep.
getting that sort of that cost base right, supporting industries in their transition, because it's in some cases it's not it's going to come at a cost both organizationally but also from an investment perspective. Overall, financially, it is, the right thing to do, but it's not like it's going to be simple in the short term. So we will have to be thinking about how we support from an infrastructure perspective, as well as, that financing the transition perspective,
Mm.
what that actually looks like for Queensland. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion we have at Sustain Queensland, given that it's not, it's not just you and me. We've got fantastic speakers coming in who can unpack this from all different parts of, our great Queensland ecosystem.
Yes, well, you and I are just the precursors to what's
We
going to be
are.
a fascinating conversation of the two panels that have been set up, and
Mm.
the representation across Queensland business on those panels is going to be really interesting to hear the I think the aspirations that are going on, but also the practical challenges that are facing in this time
Mm.
of transition.
Mm.
But you talked about financing, so the next question is definitely about that, and in particular the question of investment. In taking what you've said, what does that mean for a business that's now making real decisions about where to invest and what to prioritize and how quickly to move? And the work that yourself through the school has been doing with the AASB, without giving away anything, are there any sense of or feelers around business understanding what decisions have to be made about investment? Or is it still a case of understanding what the risk looks like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say different organizations are at different stages,
Yeah.
within this learning cycle. So it's probably not a one size fits all answer there. Um, but like I think there's some organizations who are still at that period of developing that common language, because it's hard. It's hard to plan for what in some cases is quite a fundamental change to the business model
Mm.
that's operating. And really we can think about it as just sort of sometimes sitting on the edge of an organization's operation. But this question of how to decarbonize cuts across every aspect of a
Yeah.
business. And so if we don't have that foundational understanding, that's really difficult to achieve. So in some cases, we see our organizations still trying to get that in place. In other ways, there's, other organizations who have quite advanced climate transition plans or are in the process of putting these climate transition plans in place. So that then allows them to almost step back, given what goals they have, when the investments need to be done. And it's when I think organizations reach that level of maturity, when they can think about their asset management planning, over the next sort of 20 years and start to see where the integration of the transition comes.
Mm.
Then I think that's when, we're starting to get that sort of real feel about when the investments need to take place, and then how they can be financed.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
that question of financing is obviously one that we're about to kick off the research on. So, we will be
Yeah.
keen
Yeah.
on talking to more
Absolutely.
people about this issue over the next 12 months.
And particularly as we've seen phase one of reports now out, and now we move into phase two and ultimately phase three over the next 18, 24 months. And at the same time, it's almost a phasing of the investment community understanding what that risk reveals that they will then start to either not invest in or they will definitely lean into because of the way, as you say, that business, depending on where they're at, have been actualizing that kind of risk back into their capital decision making. I agree. It's a most fascinating time to see the business model change as a result
Yeah.
of what we're doing, don't you think?
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And the question, around mobilizing capital is a really interesting one because we've seen, given we're saying energy transition underpins it, if we're thinking about the need for that growth in renewables and clean energy infrastructure, um, investment cycles have really extended out. So, at the moment,
Okay.
they're now
Yep.
saying, in renewables across Australia, it's probably on average about 5 years to get a solar farm from first development to commissioning. It's about eight
Yeah.
years for a
Right.
wind farm. That's
Uh-huh.
quite a long time.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's challenging. It's not like an easy thing to click your fingers and these things sort of happen. Quite a bit like lead time.
Well, I was the lead environmental lawyer on the Capital Wind Farm outside of Bungendore many, many, many years ago.
Hmm.
That didn't take 5 years, can I tell you? But then it was, as you say, it was a one-off. It was not really thought of as being part of this solution in its broader sense. So but then that goes to the next question around trust and social license, which you raised in the opening. And I really, really am interested in that because it's obviously a big question in regional and rural communities across Australia, not just Queensland, but particularly your observations and or insights around that notion of that trust and social license being increasingly important. So, why are they becoming so important as to whether a project or an industry actually succeeds? What is it about them that is either missing or needs to be present for there to be success by that community to actually uh, allow and, in some cases, embrace?
Yeah, this is such a complex thing, the trust discussion. And I feel like your example was probably a good one in that, it was new, probably relatively new at that time. I'm assuming there weren't a whole lot of other developers coming in or other wind farms. It was one. So what we're now seeing is a whole different level of complexity of that trust ecosystem. And in some cases, it's not just one farm and one impact, it's cumulative. So we're
Yeah,
seeing
okay.
communities which it's happening again and again and again. Um, so it can sort of reach this sort of threshold level where it's, becomes quite difficult and quite divisive. And
Mm,
it's not every community, obviously, but,
mm,
we're certainly seeing a level of tension, within communities and there's a whole lot of things at play here. I mean, some of the concerns are very real and justified. Yes, there are concerns about water and workforce and people coming in and, all those sort of things. But we're also seeing, a level of concern about things that aren't necessarily true. So
mm.
we're also seeing this rise in social media and traditional media with uh, with views which may not in fact be accurate. And so this all sort of comes and inflames obviously a situation. Um, and this is, it's a real issue for a lot of communities. And for, from an organizational perspective, if you don't have the trust and you don't obtain that sort of social license for the community operating, it's very difficult. And
Mm.
depending on, which area of Australia you're located, that determines sort of how challenging it makes, getting your project over the line.
Over the line. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot coming towards it, but I think in there's cases and every area of Queensland and Australia is different because they've all had different trajectories and how they got here. So we might have some areas, within the Western Downs, for
Yeah, right.
example, which have had a history of like coal seam gas, and they've had renewables in there for longer. And, it's a different
Okay.
conversation within those communities than it is with some other communities, maybe in interstate res who,
Yeah, right.
it might be new to that community to have these discussions.
Okay.
And the economies are all different, so,
Yes.
in
Yeah.
some ways it might be bringing advantage, and some, they might not see it as that. So understanding that sort of context and having those, what I would say is kind of like a brutally honest conversation about what it would mean, and listening to the concerns. I think that um, putting it in place right from the beginning, to develop that trust between the developer and the community.
Yeah.
I just don't think once it's broken down, it's just so difficult to repair,
Yeah.
versus if you can keep on having those sort of really honest conversations, and they might not be easy conversations, but I think the time of coming in and saying everything will be rosy and you'll get lots of money, I don't think that
I
passes
I
with
suspect they're well
communities.
and truly over.
Yeah, well, yeah, if it was ever there, it's definitely not
It,
not there now. Yeah.
but it's interesting that you make I think, a valid point, whether you really realize it or not, that there's no one linear approach by business to this, nor is there in relation to how to deal with communities, because of the different stratification of whether region, whether economic
Mm.
circumstance. I would have thought topography of itself was another particular issue that was relevant, because some regions might be more attractive to certain types of new energy technology than others. So and then you've got the question of those who are in the business of creating renewable projects may look at it from a project development entrepreneurial point of view, as opposed to perhaps that which maybe the governments of this country could have thought of in a more infrastructure organisational way, rather than necessarily talking about it as climate action, by
Mm.
saying we are looking at infrastructure to move towards a different type of energy, rather than necessarily saying, well, we have to do it because of climate change. Anyway, that's the rantings of Andrew Petersen. But
I
that
think
raises
Oh, I was just going to say, I do think you raise a good point, though. This the way we communicate these things with
absolutely,
communities is,
yes,
and it has to be very much a listening based style of communication and engagement. So, like we have lived and breathed energy transition for what, 25 years or something, but not everyone is in that position.
I'm much
It's
older than
pretty
you, Belinda.
complex.
I'm much older than you, Belinda. It's a 35 years. What are you talking about? Now, speaking of being around, the next question is around skills and leadership. And because you come from a business school, the question of what are the skills and capabilities that Queensland business and Queensland business people, and particularly their leadership, really need now to build to handle these changes well. What are you seeing within the school? What are you seeing across the university?
Mm.
And how is the university slash school helping this, once in a generation, it's probably once in two generations opportunity to really reformulate the skills and leadership of professionals in this country?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, look, we do a lot of education, obviously, within our undergrad and master's
Change
course,
that.
also at the executive education level. And it's a really good question about what skills are required. And I would say there's, that in the past, if we sort of go back 5 years, most of what we were doing around climate was that climate literacy type of
Yep,
thing.
yep.
So, how do we get everyone up to that same standard so that they
Explain
can have it?
CO2 equivalent. Yes, I get
Yeah,
that.
so we've had a lot of that.
Right.
But now once an organization's at that level, we can start to build these sort of specialist skill sets. And things like scenario planning. I love scenario planning, but I
You
also
do.
think it's
Yes.
vitally important because as we've discussed, the future will be very, very, very different to what we're sitting in currently, which can be really difficult from a cognitive perspective
Mm.
to learn from. Um, so those sort of specialist skill sets in different areas, I think, is something that we need to be developing more of, and we are. I think even things around those sort of risk assessments and financial management, that link to decisions around our climate change and sustainability are also, really sort of fundamental. One thing that I maybe we aren't kind of there yet, but I would like to see more of is how you value the intangible. So how do you, sure, we put a price on carbon when it's part of what we're, doing
Mm.
in the reporting, but there's other things as well, like biodiversity,
Ah,
and
haha.
those sort of social license issues. How do we think about them internally so that they become an integral part of the decision making, and business cases, so that we are taking them into account, because a lot of these things, like we've seen with climate, they might be seen as non-financial at the moment, but go forward another 5 years or something, then they may well be like a financial input into the way a company is performing. So I think there's things that we're delivering now. I also think there's more thinking that we can be doing and delivering, into organizations and the capabilities that they sort of build.
Okay. Very interesting. Second last question, and it touches upon your title. I don't want to give away what you're going to be telling us at Sustain Queensland, but your role talks about ethical transitions. So, what does that actually mean from a business perspective, making decisions in the real world?
Yeah. Um, Look, I take a very basic view of ethics. It's doing what is right. It's doing what you know to be right.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and if we're thinking about trust and the role trust plays in getting that social license and performing from also from an economic perspective, then we need to be thinking when we make a decision, not just what is the financial benefit of doing this, but what are the social and environmental consequences of making the decision? And how can we minimize those negative impacts on communities and the environment? And how can we try and, where possible, sort of increase and be a positive
Mm,
force for good? Um, and I think this isn't, once you change the way in which you're making decisions, I don't think this is a hard thing to do. It's just that, in the past, we haven't necessarily been rating these issues at the same level,
yeah. Yep.
in our decision-making process.
Hmm.
So for me, it's a reframing, of the way businesses operate and, the values and the culture within the business. So it kind of has implications right across the board because, and talk about boards, it probably really, it really needs to come from the top. That's who sets the culture and the values. And so if you've got the strategy and the culture and the values set to take into account ethics, you know, and ethics on a social environmental front, not just considering the financial performance, then I think that then gives permission to those sort of next level down to actually be able
Yeah.
to that and to embed that and to feel that that is valued.
Yep.
Um,
Set
yeah,
tone
so
and culture and then see the behavior reflect that tone and culture. And then that turns into the measurable steps that you take in relation to exacting out the behavior, therefore the culture and the ethics that you've set in the first place. Yes, yeah,
that's it. And it's got to be in the
very
long-term
right.
success of the business because
Totally,
we're
totally.
all stakeholders in so many businesses. So, if we evolve as a society to expect more, then then the businesses who have been doing the right thing and have been building that sort of ethical foundation, will be the ones that'll, continue to be successful.
Here's hoping. All right. So if you're talking to a CEO or a board listening to this today, what's the one question you think they should take back into their organization?
it probably is aligned with that last thing that we spoke
Yeah.
about, is that have they set the long-term strategy and the culture in a way that will allow their businesses to evolve, you know, and act on climate sustainability issues,
Hmm.
because it's like it's difficult to do it from the ground up, isn't it? It's
Very much so.
very much so. So, if we're going in and we're trying to, from an educational perspective, trying to assist companies to develop those capabilities and skills,
Yeah.
um, the individuals involved need to feel that they have that alignment from the top. So have they set that for their company, or are they very much looking at that sort of next 3-year term?
Okay. Yes. Are you thinking about your long term rather than your immediate term? Yes.
Mm.
Although it's a valid question, and you could fold into, well, your immediate term is relevant to your long term, therefore you should be thinking about it in the immediate term.
Mm. Mm.
It's gosh, and I'm a lawyer, not an economist or an accountant. All right. To round this out, and it's probably a question to both of us, if somebody was listening today and was wondering whether Sustain Queensland was for them,
Mm.
what's the conversation you'd most like them to come along and be part of? I'll start because I'll give you some thinking time.
Okay.
I think it's I think it's because it's a gathering of really insightful commentators from the university, but also from business, in a serious and practical conversation about how this works its way through to improve the economy and ultimately the society outcomes for Queensland. And in doing that, it's a great networking opportunity. I was blown away by last year's attendance, but how many people stayed not just for the event, but also right afterwards. I think we had to kick them out. And I just felt that that had a real strong signal that there was an appetite for people learning together and finding opportunities to network and collaborate and build upon what they were, as you just said, no company is an island. They need to learn from others. They can build collaboration with others. They can invest in others. They can actually JV with others. There are all these opportunities. You don't have to think about this transition from your own point of view. And that's what I think Sustain Queensland encourages you to look at and be part of. Belinda, what about you?
Yeah, I would really encourage people to come along because, it's not an easy space that we're operating in currently, but you'll be there with like-minded individuals to have what I think are really important discussions. Um, and I'm really keen to hear from,
Mm.
it's not a one-way discussion point. Sure, we've got great speakers and great panelists, but I'm also very, very keen to hear from individuals within the audience who are living this, every day, so that we can understand where their challenges are. We can, help. It can help inform, what we're doing within the university. But as you say, sharing that discussion with others from across industry, I think is really important in terms of how we sort of progress this. But I guess, yeah, what I'm really looking forward to is hearing from everyone who's present in terms of what they're experiencing, where they need further help with, and how we can sort of progress the Queensland to be more sustainable as a state and economy.
And the role that the business school plays in that, because it's an important role and it has been a long-term one. So, Belinda, thank you so much for joining me today. Look, if things we've talked about today, whether that's investment, whether it's competitiveness, whether it's the question of trust, the skills, and particularly Queensland's future, are your issues that you are dealing with, then Sustain Queensland 2026 is definitely where we'll keep that conversation going. It's on Wednesday, the 2nd of September, from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. at Customs House in the heart of Brisbane. Registration closes on Wednesday, the 26th of August, and seats are going fast. I'm not just saying that, they are actually going fast. And if you haven't registered, please do so. We'll include the link into this conversation. So again, thank you, Belinda, for your time. Looking forward to seeing you on the 2nd. And for now, as I always say when I close out, looking forward to seeing all of you somewhere in the future. Bye for now.
Thanks, Andrew. Bye.